Hello and welcome to IAMC Radio and Podcast.
Great to be here.
Today, we're going to explore some of the top news headlines for April 22nd.
Quite a bit happening around the world.
Yes, definitely. Let's start in West Africa, specifically Benin. There's some concerning news there.
Yes. A very significant attack, sadly. Jama at-Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, JNIM, they're claiming responsibility.
They're the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Sahel.
That's the one. They're saying they killed 70 soldiers in northern Benin, hit 2 military posts.
70! That's a huge number for Benin.
It is. It seems to be the highest death toll they've claimed there. These posts were in Kandi Province, Alabore Department, quite far north, over 500 kilometers from Cotonou.
And JNIM's been expanding its reach, hasn't it?
They have. They formed back in 2017, mostly operating out of Burkina Faso and Niger initially, but between 2021 and 2022, we saw them really push into Benin and Togo.
How are they managing that expansion?
Well, a key factor seems to be their use of these sort of ungoverned protected areas. Think Penjari National Park, Park Wia, which actually straddles Benin, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and even Kanjinji National Park over in Nigeria.
So they use these vast natural reserves for movement and trade.
Exactly. It gives them cover and routes that bypass official checkpoints. It makes them very difficult to contain.
And this isn't the first attack in Benin, though maybe the deadliest.
No, not the first. There was an attack back in January 2025. They said 28 soldiers killed in the Point Triple Zone. And about a year before that, 7 soldiers killed in Penjari National Park. But 70. That's a major escalation.
It puts it closer to some of the devastating attacks we saw in Niger a few years back.
Yeah, exactly. Like those attacks in December 2019 where 71 and then 91 soldiers were killed in separate incidents. It highlights the ongoing severe security challenge across the Sahel.
And this is all happening against that backdrop of shifting geopolitics.
Right.
Countries breaking ties with France, looking towards Russia.
Precisely. The whole security architecture is in flux, which, complicates the response.
Okay, let's shift focus now. Staying in Nigeria, but a different kind of security issue. Bandits in Kwara State.
Yes, this is a disturbing report. Bandits have apparently imposed a huge levy, 60 million naira, on about 12 communities there.
60 million? Why?
The claim, or the accusation from the bandits, is that these communities helped the military during recent operations against them.
So it's retaliation, or extortion based on that claim.
Seems like it. The communities listed Koloma, Danhan Zargado, Dan Gadabi, Sabuwar Tunga, Makini, Bubaka, Yelwa, Bawada, Koda, Manya, and Kabusu. They're terrified. If they don't pay, they fear, abductions, arson, even killings.
Has this been confirmed?
A security reporter, Bakatin, flagged it on X, and a former local councillor confirmed it to BBC Hausa. It apparently followed some military raids where the bandits took losses.
So the military action might have provoked this specific demand.
That seems to be the sequence, yes. And reports say 8 residents were kidnapped from Zargado, and their release is tied to this payment.
That's an impossible situation for the residents.
Completely trapped. They feel caught between the bandits and, frankly, what they see as inadequate protection from the government.
And this isn't happening in isolation, is it?
No. The Coalition of Northern Groups, CNG, they recently described the killings happening in Plateau, Zamfara, and Benue as a national disgrace, pointing to, governance failure. They mentioned over 100 deaths just in Plateau recently.
So CNG is blaming government inaction.
Yes, accusing the government of not doing enough and demanding reinforced security measures immediately.
Another difficult situation. Let's move over to Burkina Faso. News of a coup plot being foiled.
That's the official announcement from the military government there. They say they stopped a major coup plot aimed at the Tunga leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré.
What are the details they've released?
The state security minister, Mahamadou Sana, went on TV. He claimed active and retired soldiers were conspiring with terrorist groups. The plan was supposedly to attack the presidential palace on April 16.
Working with terrorist groups, that seems unusual for a coup plot.
It does raise questions. The claim is they were recruiting soldiers, sharing strategic info with terrorists, all to create chaos. The alleged goal was to install a regime controlled by some unnamed international organization.
And they're blaming outside actors.
They are pointing fingers specifically at Ivory Coast, saying the masterminds are operating from there. They even identified 2 former army officers allegedly involved. They also mentioned trying to manipulate religious and traditional leaders.
This comes after other recent instability.
Yes, just the previous week, several military personnel were arrested, suspected of plotting destabilization. It's a very tense atmosphere.
And we have to remember, Traoré himself took power in a coup.
Exactly, back in 2022. His justification was frustration over the government's failure to handle the jihadist violence. But large parts of the country, maybe nearly 40%, are still outside government control.
Plus, their international alignment has shifted dramatically.
Right, away from France towards Russia, and they've pulled out of ECOWAS, along with Mali and Niger. It's a really complex picture.
Indeed. Okay, let's switch gears completely now. News from the U.S. involving a Delta plane.
Yes, this happened at Orlando International Airport in Florida. A Delta Airlines plane had to be evacuated just before takeoff.
What happened?
An engine fire. It was Delta Flight 1213, an Airbus A330, supposed to fly to Atlanta. Passengers reported seeing flames and smoke coming from the right engine.
Scary stuff. Was everyone okay?
Thankfully, yes. They initiated an emergency evacuation. Passengers used the slides. Fire crews were on scene quickly. No injuries reported among the 200 passengers, 10 flight attendants, and 2 pilots.
And investigations are underway.
Oh yes, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, has already launched an investigation into the cause of the engine failure.
Good to hear everyone was safe. Now back to Nigeria. Edo State this time, involving a traditional ruler.
That's right. The governor of Edo State, Monday Opipolo, has indefinitely suspended the traditional ruler of Iwano Kingdom. That's Chief George Oshiapi Igabor.
Why the suspension?
It's linked to rising insecurity in the area specifically, increased kidnappings and killings. Iwano Kingdom is in Agent Abode in the Etsako East local government area.
Was there a specific incident that triggered this?
It seems the immediate catalyst was the arrest of the monarch's secretary, Chief Peter Omiagbemi. He was arrested in connection with the murder of a palace chief, John Ikabaida.
Ah, so it's quite serious.
Very. Investigations are ongoing, and the state government says it's committed to bringing anyone involved to justice.
Okay. Still in Nigeria, but focusing on education now. A report from the University of Ibadan sounds quite alarming.
It really is. The Education Rights Campaign, the ERC, at UI, is sounding the alarm about female students doing something quite drastic to pay for their education.
What are they doing?
They're reportedly donating eggs for IVF procedures.
Donating eggs to pay tuition.
That's what the ERC claims, yes. They see it as a direct result of the, well, commercialization of public education and the tough economic situation generally.
Have fees gone up that much at Ibadan?
Dramatically.
Yeah.
During the 2020-2023 academic session, tuition went from around 70,000 naira up to between 230,000 and 412,000 naira. That's a hike of between 453% and 750%. Huge increases.
Wow. And have conditions improved with that extra money?
According to the ERC, no. They say learning and living conditions haven't improved, and they're actually expecting further increases.
So the ERC sees this egg donation not as a choice but
as a last resort. A symptom of a system under immense financial pressure, where students are forced into desperate measures. They call it a failed system. They are condemning the lack of adequate funding for public education, arguing it's a constitutional right.
Are students able to protest this freely?
Well, the ERC also mentioned concerns about a clampdown on student activists who are protesting the fee hikes. They're demanding the reinstatement of one student activist, Nice Lidinus.
So their demands are clear.
Yes. Proper funding for public education, reverse the fee hikes, and implement student-friendly welfare programs.
That's a tough situation for those students. Moving on to Rivers State, more political developments there.
Yes, fresh protests have broken out in Port Harcourt.
Who is protesting this time?
Supporters of the suspended governor, Siminalayi Fubara. They started marching from Agri Road, carrying placards, demanding he be reinstated.
Right, he was suspended back in March, wasn't he?
That's correct, March 18th. It happened after President Bola Tinubu declared a state of emergency in Rivers. The deputy governor and members of the State House were also affected.
And the reasons given for the suspension?
Allegations of gross misconduct, abuse of office, and actions that were seen as threatening peace and security in the state.
So these protests are ongoing?
They seem to be. This is just the latest one. There have been others, some supporting Fubara, others condemning him. It shows the situation's still very volatile politically. This particular protest was recorded as peaceful with security present.
Okay, let's head back to the United States now. Harvard University is in the news.
Yes, they were actually suing the Trump administration.
Suing the administration. Over what?
Over threatened cuts to federal funding. It's quite a significant move.
What's the administration's reason for threatening cuts?
Well, the administration's actions are framed as a response to claims that Harvard tolerates antisemitism on campus. Also, Harvard has rejected increased government supervision of its admissions and hiring.
How much funding are we talking about?
The order was to freeze about $2.2 billion in federal funding, a substantial amount.
And Harvard's argument in the lawsuit?
They're arguing that the government is essentially using funding as leverage to control academic decisions. They say this violates the First Amendment and federal laws protecting university autonomy.
What has the administration said publicly?
Publicly, President Trump has cited concerns about antisemitism and also stated a goal of reversing diversity programs at universities like Harvard.
Has Harvard responded to those specific points?
The Harvard president, Alan Garber, has refused to negotiate over the university's independence. They deny the claims of widespread, tolerated antisemitism and say they have ongoing reforms to address campus climate issues. There's also a related threat from the Department of Homeland Security regarding international student enrollment and visa records.
So Harvard is pushing back legally?
Yes. The lawsuit seeks to have the funding freeze declared unlawful and wants the administration to cover Harvard's legal costs. It's a major clash over academic freedom and government oversight.
Definitely one to watch. Now, another report from Nigeria, this time concerning the army in Kwara State.
Yes, and these are serious accusations coming from residents in border communities, specifically in the Bruton local government area.
What are they accusing army personnel of?
Primarily extortion, but also, crucially, of failing to actually confront terrorist groups operating in the area.
So they feel the army isn't protecting them.
Worse than that, some residents are calling for the military forces to be withdrawn altogether, claiming they've become more of a liability than a help.
What specific complaints do they have?
They allege that soldiers are more interested in setting up illegal checkpoints and extorting money from farmers and motorists than engaging armed groups. There are reports of recent attacks in places like Nanaru, Tambuyan, and Gwanara, where residents feel unprotected.
Is there any corroboration for these claims?
Well, one source, apparently a customs personnel, mentioned seeing attackers who were even wearing soldier uniforms passing through checkpoints unchallenged. This same source claims soldiers regularly extort locals in Chikanda and that he himself has been targeted for extortion.
That's deeply troubling if true. What do the residents want instead?
They're calling on the government to properly equip and empower local vigilante groups with firearms, arguing they are more committed to defending the communities.
Is there a sense the army is avoiding certain areas?
There's a specific claim that no soldiers are deployed to a place called Karunji, which is reportedly a known terrorist hideout. The only protection there, according to the report, comes from local vigilantes.
Very serious allegations indeed. Okay, finally, let's turn to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes, the court is hearing arguments in a case concerning parents' rights in education, specifically related to LGBTQ+ topics.
It's the core issue.
It's about whether parents have a religious right to opt their children out of public school lessons that include LGBTQ-related content.
Where did this case originate?
It comes from a public school district in Maryland. Back in 2022, they introduced some new storybooks in elementary schools aimed at combating prejudice and discussing topics like homosexuality and gender identity.
And parents objected.
Some did. Initially, the schools apparently offered an opt-out for parents who objected on religious grounds. But later, they retracted that opt-out option, citing logistical difficulties.
So the parents...
Yes. A group of Christian and Muslim parents sued, arguing that forcing their children to engage with these materials infringes on their First Amendment right to freedom of religion and their fundamental right to direct their children's upbringing according to their faith.
This sounds like part of a wider national debate.
Absolutely. It is happening against a backdrop of ongoing controversies about book bans, curriculum control, and LGBTQ+ issues in schools, particularly in more conservative states. Think of Florida's law, often dubbed "Don't Say Gay."
Has the federal government weighed in?
Interestingly, the Justice Department under the previous administration, the Trump administration, filed briefs supporting the parents in this case. They accused the schools of textbook interference with the free exercise of religion.
So, a significant case for the Supreme Court. When can we expect a decision?
The arguments are being heard now, and a decision is expected by late June, as usual for the end of the court's term. It will certainly be closely watched.
A lot to keep track of there. That brings us to the end of our headlines for today.
Indeed. A busy news day.
Thank you for listening to today's top news headlines on IAMC Radio and podcast.